Have you ever felt like the odds were stacked so much against you? Like you were facing something so huge, so overwhelming, that there was no way you could win? This is the story of a man named Gideon, someone who felt just like that. But what happened next wasn't just a battle, it was a miracle. A story of courage, faith, humility, and a surprising twist that changed everything. Let's step back over 3,000 years into the ancient land of Israel, where the people were in serious trouble. The people of Israel were suffering. Every time they grew crops or raised animals, their enemies, most often a group called the Midianites, would swoop in and steal everything. Food, animals, even their peace. The Israelites were so scared they hid in mountain caves. Life was miserable. In their despair, they finally cried out to God for help. This is where our unlikely hero comes in. Gideon. Gideon wasn't a soldier, he wasn't rich, he wasn't even brave. In fact, when the angel of the Lord meets Gideon, he's hiding in a winepress, secretly threshing wheat so the Midianites won't find him. The angel appears and says something amazing. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon responds to the angel saying, "If the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us?" He also tells the angel, "I'm the least important person in my family, and my family's the weakest in our whole tribe." But God wasn't interested in titles. He cared more about his heart, and so he chooses Gideon to save the people of Israel. Gideon needed a sign that the Lord could really save Israel through him, so he came up with a test. He placed a wool fleece on the ground and asked God to make the fleece wet with dew, but the ground around it dry. The next morning, that's exactly what happened. Still not convinced, he asked for the opposite the next night, that the fleece be dry and the ground around it wet. Again, it happened. God was patient, and Gideon finally believed. Gideon gathered an army of 32,000 men, but God said, "That's too many. If you win with this many people, you'll think it was your strength, not mine." God had a divine plan to ensure the people of Israel understood that their victory would be attributed to his power. To reduce the number of men, God told Gideon to let anyone who was scared go home. 22,000 men left to return home. There were still too many men, so God gave one final test. Take the men to the river and watch how they drink. God instructed Gideon to separate from the rest the men that lapped water like a dog with their hands. There were 300 men. These 300 men passed the test and would face an army of over 100,000 below them in the valley. The Bible described the enemy army saying, "The Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley like locusts in abundance." The Lord said to Gideon, "Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hands." That night, God gave Gideon an unusual plan by way of an interpretation of a dream Gideon heard when he sneaked into the Midianites' camp. Upon his return to the camp of Israel, Gideon would divide and instruct each of the 300 men to carry a trumpet, a torch, and a clay jar. No swords, no shields. Gideon and his men crept into the Midianite camp in the dead of night while the enemy soldiers were sleeping. At his signal, Gideon's men blew their trumpets, smashed the jars, and held up their torches, shouting, "For the Lord and for Gideon!" The Midianites woke up in panic, confused and terrified. In the chaos, they started fighting each other, thinking they were surrounded by a massive army. The Midianite soldiers, realizing what happened, fled. Gideon and his 300 men pursued them, and with the help of the men of Ephraim, a nearby hill country, defeated the enemy and won an impossible battle. Gideon had done the impossible, not with a massive army or powerful weapons, but with faith and obedience. Because of this victory, the people of Israel asked Gideon to rule over them. He refused and saying, "The Lord will rule over you." Israel would go on to have peace for 40 years. The story of Gideon and the 300 wasn't about one man's courage. It was about how God uses the weak to do mighty things. You don't have to be strong to make a difference. God often chooses ordinary people for extraordinary things. When the odds are impossible, that's often where miracles happen. Real courage means trusting even when you're afraid or when you may feel small. Gideon was threshing wheat in fear when God called him a mighty warrior. What might God be calling you to do? Even if it seems impossible, be brave, be faithful, and remember, when God is with you, nothing is impossible.